CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. France and the UK under pressure after the tragic drowning of 27 people, including 3 children, in the English Channel.
A new era in German politics. As 3 coalition parties search for common ground, we look at what it means for Europe's biggest economy.
Seeing red over a blacklist. Beijing criticises the United States for sanctioning a dozen Chinese companies.
Welcome.
Welcome. Hairdressers learn how to meet, greet and treat some of the world's top athletes at the Beijing Winter Olympics. The UK's Interior Minister has told British lawmakers she has once again offered joint patrols with France to try and combat record levels of migrants crossing the English Channel.
27 people, including a pregnant woman and 3 children, died when their inflatable raft sank near the French city of Calais on Wednesday, in the worst incident ever recorded.
Well, we've got the latest from both sides of the Channel. Ross Cullen is in Paris, but first of all, let's talk to Andrew Wilson in Oxford. So, Andrew, both Britain and France have been trying to deflect the blame for this tragedy. What's the latest from UK authorities?
Oh, well, Robin, this is a growing problem that's really coming home to roost now with this disaster yesterday off the coast of France. 26,000 people have crossed the Channel this year. That's 3 times as many as last year. So clearly this is an exacerbated situation that shows no sign of getting easier to deal with, and yet the UK government thus far hasn't come up with much of a policy to attack it. So they have really on the ground 2 options. One is for naval vessels to prevent the migrants from crossing, which involves perhaps ramming or coming close to boats, which could be dangerous, of course, and cause further loss of life. Or the UK could welcome and escort these boats into the UK coastline, which, of course, politically would be disastrous as far as this government is concerned. It hasn't moved any further in tackling those 2 situations. And, of course, a disaster like yesterday's was something, according to the French authorities around Calais, was an accident waiting to happen. It was inevitable eventually, with these families putting to sea in overcrowded, cheap, poorly made rubber boats bought from the smugglers themselves to make this hazardous 20-mile crossing, which usually ends up being something like 40 miles because of the currents being so strong around the UK coastline. It's a complicated problem, and as you'll see from my report, at the moment there's no real answer to be considered. It's a motivation that few in Britain or France can truly fathom. To pay thousands of dollars to take your family and children through the world's busiest shipping lanes to find sanctuary in a country that doesn't want you. Even as more than 27 died on Wednesday, others made it through and more will follow.
Sadly, the dangers are very obvious, and yesterday's tragedy emphasises that. And the real sad part of this is those who organised that boat yesterday would have just viewed these people who, 27 at least people who passed away, just as a profit-making opportunity. That's why we are so determined to smash this model of business, this really evil business model.
A few years ago, this was a rare occurrence. Even in November weather, the numbers are 3 times greater than last year. The UK pays about $70 million per annum to France to help with security. French authorities regularly patrol the coastline, and 44 smuggling networks have been dismantled with 1,500 arrests. But clearly none of this is enough, and fingers are still being pointed.
There are 2 things in Britain that attract migrants. There is an immigration system. We often say that the French don't deport enough, but we deport more or less 20,000 illegal people each year. In England, it's 6,000 people, 4 times less than France, even though there are more migrants there and they have twice more illegal immigrants. So clearly, there's the bad immigration management.
What this shows is that the gangs who are sending people to sea in these dangerous craft will literally stop at nothing. But what I'm afraid it also shows is that the operation that's being conducted by our friends on the beaches, supported, as you know, with £54 million from the UK to help patrol the beaches. All the technical support that we've been giving, they haven't been enough.
Both France and Britain are focused on the smuggling gangs, multi-million-dollar criminal networks that promise jobs and prospects in the UK as long as the vulnerable migrants can pay. The gangs operate throughout Europe, and France has called on Belgium and Germany to also get involved. The UK is considering legal migrant routes with processing centres located abroad. But so far, the dangers of the Channel remain the only viable option for these desperate families. The problem the UK has is that it has very limited options. We'll hear from Ross in a minute about what the French government is going to try to do. They also are caught in their own pre-election bind, if you like. But for the UK, as I said, they've either got a prospect of challenging these boats in open water, which would be dangerous, or allowing them through, which would be politically problematic. The other option being floated around is offshore centres, perhaps setting up in a third-party country like Albania, for example, has been mentioned, where you might have the prospect of clearing camps where migrants could go there and then apply for asylum to come to the UK. That's something that would have to go through Parliament. It would be long-winded, it would be objected to, and shows no prospect of being discussed really seriously at any time soon, which leaves the UK simply dealing with firefighting the optics on this and making sure domestically that their politics don't go awry. Now, the numbers actually tell a slightly different story. The UK only processed 30,000 migrants this year. That's down from 35,000 last year and down from something like 85,000 in 2002. So there are fewer migrants applying for asylum in the UK than ever there were before. And meanwhile, European countries like France, Germany and Spain are all dealing with migrants in the 80,000s to 100,000. So the heavy lifting is still being done by Europe. It's just a noise coming from the UK. The other problem is that this trans-channel link for the people smugglers is a very lucrative option. Rather than just escorting people through Europe where pretty much they take care of themselves, they can take advantage of these vulnerable families and charge them anything between $2,500 to $7,000 a head to get on these boats and cross the Channel. It's a business that's growing as far as these criminal gangs are concerned, and both the UK and France want to concentrate on those, but of course the only way really to make the gangs go away is make life easier for the migrants, and politically that's still a problem.
Andrew Wilson, thanks very much.
Well, let's bring in Ross Cullen, who's in Paris. Ross, we're hearing France has just suggested a meeting about this crisis. What can you tell us?
Yeah, hi there. That's scheduled for Sunday in Calais, France, inviting the immigration ministers of Germany, Belgium, the Netherlands, the United Kingdom, and obviously hosted with the French immigration minister and European Union representatives, all meeting in Calais to try to find some areas of common ground on this issue. One area where there is unlikely to be alignment is the idea from the British Interior Minister, Priti Patel. She was speaking to her French counterpart, Gérald Darmanin, earlier today. She suggested the idea of joint border patrols. If you can imagine the reaction here in France, if British police officers are walking up and down the beaches of northern France, the pressure from the French opposition on French President Emmanuel Macron, and also vice versa, if the European Union border force agents are on the beaches of Kent and Sussex when the UK has left the EU but still relying on the EU to provide security for its own island, that would be a non-starter. So there are areas of divergence. France and the UK know there need to be calls for consensus, and that is the whole idea behind this meeting on Sunday.
Ross, we hear they want to collaborate on clamping down on people smuggling, and the French authorities say 5 people have been arrested. So what can you tell us about the investigation so far?
Yeah, at least 5 people arrested in connection with organising or facilitating that fatal crossing attempt yesterday. One of the detained is believed to have German papers, and also there is believed to have been a sale in Germany. The purchase of the boat that sank was believed to have taken place in Germany. So links there, an investigation underway there. The Maritime Police, the Border Police, the Central Office for Irregular Immigration all getting involved, and they are focusing on homicide, involuntary injuries and activities by organised criminal organisations.
Ross Cullen in Paris, thank you.
Germany is preparing for a post-Merkel era, with its Chancellor-in-waiting Olaf Scholz heading a three-party coalition. All eyes will be on how well his Social Democrats can work with the Greens and the FDP on issues like the environment and migration. CGTN's Natalie Carney is in Munich. So, Natalie, what are the challenges that the new coalition government will face?
Well, one of the top challenges at the moment, of course, is the COVID-19 pandemic. Today on Thursday, Germany has just breached 100,000 deaths due to the pandemic and has hit another new daily record of new infections. So that is one area the coalition is going to have to sit down and really concentrate on and come together to find a solution, because it's affecting the economy here. We just saw that third quarter GDP has gone up by 1.7%, but we're not looking very good for the fourth quarter as COVID-19 causes more restrictions across the country. The backlog in logistics is posing problems on the shops that do remain open. So there's a lot of problems in that regard. But within the coalition itself, we've got two left-leaning liberal parties who are very interested in the idea of spending to boost the economy. We've got the SPD, as you've mentioned, and the Greens, who very much want to concentrate on basically making the economy greener in all sections. Making the green alternative the easiest alternative is how they've put it. But that's going to require billions of euros in spending. And they have committed to doing that, despite the third party member in this coalition, the FDP's reluctance to do that. They're very pro-business. They're very sort of debt averse. They do not want to spend a lot of money. So there's a lot of sort of conflict and back and forth in that regard. Speaking of the FDP, they want to go forward and even come to a point of reducing taxes across the country. Great news for the German population, but at the same time, then where's the money going to come for this green transition? So there's going to be a lot of to and froing within this coalition. The FDP, yes, posing obstacles in the way of potential further spending, but also trying to keep balance in check from the left-leaning liberals who want to, as I've mentioned, spend to boost the economy.
And Natalie, some key posts in this coalition have been announced, but not all the ministers have been chosen yet, have they?
Yes, that's absolutely true. One of the most, you could say at this particular time, crucial posts, the health ministry, is still up for discussion. It's going to land within the party of the SDP, but or the SPD, excuse me. But who that person is yet to be decided. And from what we understand, too, prior to that decision, all three parties were reluctant to hold that position because of the challenges, of course, that particular ministry will face going into this fourth wave of the pandemic, and seeing how different countries are reacting with more legislation being put in place, more regulations being put in place, and the public response to that. We see the Netherlands and the public coming out with more restrictions being placed on their public lives, where in Austria, we're seeing that the government is implementing lockdowns for everyone as well as mandatory vaccinations. So which way is the ministry going to go? So that is one position that is yet to be decided. Again, it will land with someone from the SPD. And they have said, though, that that announcement of the new minister will not be made until at least the beginning of December.
Natalie Carney in Munich, thank you very much.
Well, Olivier Racau is the chief German economist at Oxford Economics, and he explained what the next chancellor needs to do to overhaul Germany's economy.
While the last government has had its hands full with several crises and just generally managing was one of the largest economies in the world, they have not really done that much to modernize the German economy. So he really needs to improve the German economy as regards digitalization, fast internet access, digital administration processes, and so on and so forth. So there's really quite a bit to do. On top of all of it, of course, he needs to make a lot of progress as regards, for instance, greening of the economy.
You say there's a lot to get busy with. You've also got pressures that are happening anyway, inflationary ones, global supply crunch. It will, as the coalition claims, Germany continue to be Europe's engine of growth and anchor of stability.
I do expect Germany to overall remain one of the solidly growing, sensibly run economies inside Europe. Overall, the policies that the coalition has agreed on implementing seem likely to make the economy greener and more modern over time. But it is true that there are a lot of challenges, not only inflation in the short run, because we do expect inflation to slow materially next year once the whole issue of supply bottlenecks is fading. But it is quite telling that the government is going to face the challenge of digitalization and greening the economy at the same time as the demographic headwinds are growing quite disproportionately, actually, in Germany compared to other countries in the Eurozone. So, for instance, in the next couple of years, we will see an increasing pace of the decline of the working force and, of course, modernizing an economy at the same time as the overall labor force is shrinking will be quite a challenge.
But of course, we also need to talk about the pandemic. Germany's economy has been hit by a fresh wave of COVID cases. That's going to be a focus, isn't it?
Actually, it was quite interesting yesterday when the new coalition was presenting its deal. The future Chancellor Scholz was first off talking about an emergency meeting he and the other future heads of the coalition had with current Chancellor Merkel exactly on this, how to deal with the pandemic. And for now, they do not seem willing to implement additional tightening on top of the so-called 2G and 3G testing and vaccine rules that have been imposed last week and are now gradually rolled out throughout the country. However, if you look at the increased pressure on the hospitalization on the hospital system in Germany, I would not be surprised if we will see additional restrictions imposed at some point this quarter. And indeed, that's also one of the main worries I have for the near-term economic outlook. We already have seen a slowdown in mobility measures that does indicate there is a slowdown in services activity, and additional measures that might be implemented in the next couple of weeks would, of course, worsen the near-term outlook a little bit further. That's why I think there is an increasing risk of the German economy even contracting in the fourth quarter of 2021.
Earlier this week, German officials were saying it's inevitable that vaccines will become mandatory. What do you think?
Personally, I do think that this might eventually become one of the measures that the new government will take. They're reluctant to do so for now. They do want to increase the pressure on the non-vaccinated by, for instance, having the so-called 3G rules, where you have to be vaccinated, tested, or have to be recovered in order to go to work, use public transport, and so on and so forth. So there is some hope that maybe there will be enough vaccinations to not have to impose a vaccine mandate. However, I do think in the end they might just get there, because there is still the risk of new variants popping up.
Still ahead. Thanksgiving and retail go together like turkey and pumpkin pie. We're in New York to talk about the impact of this year's holiday.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of a story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us, excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
Why, this is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
This week on Razor, a special report on the battle to save Australia's iconic little blue penguins from introduced predators and climate change by giving them their very own special breed of allies.
To have iconic species as your flagship to a particular conservation helps a lot. It's a quite unique attraction and it's quite incidental success.
Welcome back. Remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, we're available 24 hours a day on Freeview.
China says it will take all necessary measures to defend companies affected by new sanctions imposed by the United States.
Washington has added 27 entities to its restricted trade list, including 12 from China, citing security and foreign policy concerns.
A spokesperson from China's foreign ministry condemned the move, calling it an abuse of state power in a bid to suppress Chinese companies.
This move by the U.S. has seriously harmed the interests of Chinese companies. It has recklessly disrupted the international economic order and free trade rules and seriously threatens global industrial supply chains. It could be said that the U.S. is in a state of hysteria and showing a complete lack of moral restraint. We firmly oppose these measures and demand that the U.S. immediately corrects its mistakes.
CGTN's John Terrett is following this story from New York. John, good to see you. Look, there have been so many sanctions and blacklists over the past few years. So how significant are these ones?
Well, I think that's the point, you know, Juliet and Robin. This is not an isolated incident, and it is absolutely no coincidence, by the way, that today, Thursday, here in New York and around the rest of the country, is the major holiday of Thanksgiving. So there's no news programs on the telly here. We're the only ones talking about this, and maybe the serious newspapers like the New York Times and the Washington Post. And, of course, that's what they do. They release this information when no one's likely to report it over the weekend or on the occasion of a major public holiday. Now, China's newly appointed ambassador to Washington, D.C. is called Qin Gang, and he says that every time they make one of these announcements, it amounts to an abuse of state power. And the embassy in Washington says that the U.S. uses the catch-all concept of national security and abuses state power to suppress and restrict Chinese enterprise in all possible means. And Qin Gang goes even further than that. He wants to invoke the spirit of the recent virtual summit that took place between President Xi in the Great Hall of the People and President Biden at the White House. There was a certain optimism around that, I think, certainly among many people in the United States. Not all, because some of them were quite critical of what President Biden did not say to President Xi. But generally speaking, there was an air of optimism after that. And Qin Gang says that really the U.S. must learn to meet China halfway instead of going further down the wrong path. And the problem really appears to be Taiwan. It keeps coming up time and time again. Americans are being told all the time that China is their new enemy and that China is about to invade the island of Taiwan, which I don't think it is, but that's the narrative here. On top of that, we have the delisting of Chinese telecoms companies at the New York Stock Exchange. We have the anti-China competition bill, which people who push it through Congress think, if it's passed, will actually give the U.S. a competitive edge over China in parts of the world like Africa, for example. It's presently stalled on Capitol Hill, by the way, but may be attached to the big infrastructure vote that is coming up sometime in the next couple of weeks. And then now there is pressure on President Biden to boycott the Winter Olympics in Beijing coming up early next year. Whether that means a boycott of the athletes or a diplomatic boycott or the fact that he won't go is not clear, but pressure is certainly growing in that direction because of this announcement and others like it in the last 24 hours.
So a lot to talk about over Thanksgiving lunch. I hope you've got one lined up with pumpkin pie and turkey. But meanwhile, the iconic Macy's Day Parade is back. So how big of a boost is it for Macy's, but of course for the entire retail sector?
Yeah, well, first of all, good for you guys for doing this story, because my goodness me, I've been listening to the program, and there is a lot of bad news in the world at the moment. And here in New York, we have a little bit of good news for you. Now, I'm sitting in the southern end of Manhattan, 3 miles to the north of me. It's all breaking out now in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, the 95th event of its kind. As you can see from behind me, beautiful day in New York, 45 degrees. I cannot stress how important to Americans Thanksgiving is and how important the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade is. The crowds this year are about 7 deep. The parade lasts all the way from Central Park West down to the Macy's store, which is on 34th and Broadway. There are 15 huge balloons the size of houses, 28 floats, 800 clowns, marching bands, cheerleaders, and among the big balloons, favourites like SpongeBob, the Pillsbury Doughboy, Sonic the Hedgehog, Pikachu, and a huge blow-up Jamie Owen, which we call the Grinch, who stole Christmas. Yes, he's here. And the funny thing is, this is televised nationally. And on NBC, Al Roker is a very famous weatherman, absolute U.S. institution on television. And President Biden just called him live on the program and said, look, you're back, meaning they didn't have a parade last year, but they're back this year. And America is back, he said. And the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, in a press conference yesterday was touting the fact that the parade is back, saying New York is back as well. Now, what a difference between here and what's being reported by us in Europe at the moment, where you've got these COVID restrictions coming in again in places like Austria and Germany and the Republic of Ireland. It's a very, very different atmosphere here. Everybody is being very positive now. There are pockets of, where you absolutely must wear a mask, and the president is talking about getting people to come over the land borders in January to prove that they have been vaccinated, including truck drivers. But a very, very different atmosphere as we build up to the huge excesses of the Christmas holidays. And I think, for me, a great test is going to be when they put the tree up at the Rockefeller Center, which is very close to where the parade is happening now. Normally, at Christmas time, you can't get near that tree for foreign tourists. So in a couple of weeks' time, I'm going to go there and report to you about how busy it is. And if it's not very busy, then that will mean that New York is not really back like they say it is. Juliet and Robin?
Oh, interesting. Hang a CGTN bauble on the tree if you can get close enough. John Terry, always a pleasure. Thanks very much.
I will.
Soaring energy prices have forced yet another British energy firm out of business. Orbit Energy has ceased trading after the jump in wholesale gas prices meant the company faced unsustainable losses. More than 20 UK energy suppliers have now folded in the past few months.
Ukraine's government has signed a memorandum with Airbus to buy or lease 22 planes. They'll be used for the creation of a new national airline, set to begin operating by the end of 2022. The agreement could extend to a collaboration between Airbus and Ukraine's aerospace industry.
Shares in Chinese developer Kaiser have rallied, closing 13% higher after it announced a debt restructuring plan. The company is also seeking to extend maturity on $400 billion worth of bonds currently due in December to 2023. Kaiser has been struggling to pay back investors. Its shares were suspended from trading at the start of this month after it missed a payments deadline.
Baidu and Pony AI have become the first companies to be allowed to charge passengers for driverless robo-taxi services in Beijing. The vehicles will still have a human sitting behind the wheel, ready to intervene if necessary. The two companies have not yet unveiled their fees, although analysts expect them to be similar to traditional taxis.
Still to come on CGTN, is Spain bucking the COVID trend in Europe? We report from Madrid, where booster jab uptake is high and deaths are low.
It's the first day in Germany that vaccination centers like this one are offering a third jab.
There are fears there could be a fifth wave of COVID-19 cases.
Market watchers have a keen eye on infection rates,
safety and efficacy of COVID-19 shots.
France closed schools in the first lockdown in spring last year.
France has been a leader in vaccinating youngsters.
if a spike necessitates another lockdown.
Italy is now close to reaching its target of immunising 80% of the population over the age of 12.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space. We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and the bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Robin Dwyer and Juliette Mann. The headlines again. France and the UK under pressure after the tragic drowning of 27 people, including 3 children, in the English Channel.
And seeing red over a blacklist. Beijing criticises the United States for sanctioning a dozen Chinese companies.
Leaders from Asia and Europe are holding talks over enhancing regional cooperation. The two-day meeting is being live-streamed from Cambodia, which holds the rotating presidency of the conference. Chinese Premier Li Keqiang and the EU's Charles Michel and Ursula von der Leyen are among those to address the meeting. Let's talk to Giles Gibson, who is in Brussels. So, Giles, what's been said so far?
Well, on day one, we've heard from Li Keqiang, the Chinese Premier, talking about how the two regions need to work together more on vaccines and drug development to fight the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. Ursula von der Leyen, the European Commission President, really echoed his words on COVID-19. She also talked a lot about trade, saying that the members of this grouping make up 65% of global GDP. We've also heard from Charles Michel, the President of the European Council. A slight difference there. He talked about the European Union's values, saying that it has a commitment to universal democratic rights and fundamental freedoms. This is a two-day summit, but it's worth noting that this is more about discussing big ideas, big concepts, such as connectivity and pandemics, rather than trying to thrash out an agreement, a particular text, like we saw those really intense negotiations going on at the recent COP26 climate change talks.
So how important is this meeting in increasing cooperation in the region?
Well, if you think about it, this is one of the biggest international groupings in the world. It has more than 50 members drawn from a really diverse just sort of group of countries all over the world. You've got the EU, obviously, you've got the United Kingdom, Australia, also Russia, and then some countries in Asia as well, of course, including Malaysia, China and the Philippines. The group itself says that it's an informal platform for dialogue and cooperation. But it is worth noting that the EU has had some rough relations, some complex relations with a few of the members over the course of the last 12 months or so. The EU has actually placed sanctions on at least two of the participating countries on Myanmar and China. China responded to those sanctions with counter-sanctions on members of the European Parliament as well. So despite all this talk about cooperation and dialogue, there's a little bit of tension as well bubbling just beneath the surface.
Giles Gibson in Brussels, thank you.
A rescue mission at a Siberian mine has been suspended over fears of an explosion due to high levels of methane gas. At least 11 people were killed after the mine filled with smoke after a fire in the ventilation shaft. Local officials say dozens of workers are still trapped underground. At least 8 people have been killed and several injured in an explosion in Somalia's capital, Mogadishu. Terror group Al-Shabaab have claimed responsibility for the attack, which witnesses say targeted a UN security convoy.
Sweden got its first female Prime Minister on Wednesday, but she resigned within hours of being appointed. Magdalena Andersson stepped down after Parliament voted through an opposition budget instead of the government. That led to the Green Party quitting the coalition. The Speaker of Parliament is now in talks with party leaders over the way forward. Croatia's government has finalised a $1.2 billion deal to buy 12 second-hand fighter jets from France. The deal was signed as French President Emmanuel Macron visited the Balkan nation, the first time a French president has been there since the breakup of Yugoslavia in the 1990s. Croatia said the jets, which will begin arriving in 2024, will strengthen its position as a NATO member.
Europe is now deep into another wave of COVID-19. Germany has passed 100,000 deaths. Slovakia has gone into full national lockdown. France is offering booster jabs to all adults. Rahul Pathak is in Madrid for us. Rahul, tell us a little bit more about the mixed picture across Europe.
Well, hi there, Julia. First thing I can tell you, in the last few hours, we've heard that the Czech government have declared a state of emergency for 30 days due to their rise in coronavirus cases. A state of emergency, of course, allows the Czech government to order restrictions on all aspects of public life. They still haven't given details of what those restrictions are going to be. There's been mooted a ban on attending bars and restaurants, but we'll have to wait and see what those restrictions are. But it'd be in no doubt that they are coming. But let's look at Germany now. Yeah, you mentioned that 100,000 COVID-related deaths. That recent surge has also included 351 people dying in just the last 24 hours. And that, of course, has placed huge pressure on the country's healthcare system. The intensive care units are full up, almost at breaking point due to the large numbers of people being admitted. And that really harks back to the dark, dark days of the pandemic back in 2020. Now, why is this? Well, someone pointed to the fact that in terms of Western Europe, Germany is way down the list when it comes to the percentage of its population that has been fully vaccinated. To use a sporting analogy, it's kind of mid-table with around 67% of its population fully vaccinated. Compare that to Portugal, who are at the top of the table with around 88% of its population having at least 2 jabs. So, and you can also say that the vaccination or the poor vaccination rate is one of the reasons why Slovakia is having such a bad time of it. 55% of Slovakians have had at least just 2 COVID jabs, and that is one of the lowest rates in the EU as a whole. Now, as you were talking about, the French President Emmanuel Macron announcing that France will require a booster shot for all those aged 65 and older. Well, this has been brought about as a result of the French President asking the French not to let their guard down. This is a response to the news that many restaurants, many bars, many businesses have stopped asking French people for their COVID passports to inspect them when they enter their premises. This is something that they're required to do so by law. And this first started happening in the summer when COVID infection rates were steadily decreasing in France. But of course, the weather is now turning very cold, as it is here in Madrid as well. People are getting sick, and Emmanuel Macron is saying the French have to be much more strict when it came to enforcing those rules. Those rules that, of course, have been put in place for their own safety. Juliette?
Well, Rahul, what about where you are in Madrid? Are you mid-table, top table? I'm not so good with the sporting analogies.
Spain is, I think, it's third in that table in terms of countries in Europe with a high rate of vaccination. Their rate, COVID infection rate, has been rising, but it's nowhere near the rate of its European neighbours. And I've been looking at some of the reasons why. Here's my report. A typical start to the school day in Madrid. A 9 a.m. roll call, and just like last year, everyone who comes through the door needs to wear a mask. Mask wearing for outdoor activities has been relaxed, but some schools like the Everest here in Madrid have chosen to continue with this measure in order to keep infection rates low. No vaccines are approved for under 12s in Spain, but the uptake for those over that age has been very encouraging.
Most of our students are now vaccinated. That has helped us a lot with prevention of infection and, most importantly, reduce the number of students that need to quarantine. So that is much better for their education, as remote learning is simply not the same.
Now, the population of Spain has well and truly embraced the vaccination drive. 89% of all people aged 12 and over have been double jabbed, meaning that the infection rates here are relatively low. Also, people here continue to wear masks outdoors, even though it's not mandatory. Vaccine efficacy has been waning across Europe. The government here has promoted a third booster jab to those over 70. ECDC figures released this week have shown that just 4 people died in Spain over the last 2 weeks. That's one of the lowest death rates in Europe, compared with those countries with a less active uptake.
The fact that older people that are already fully vaccinated are now getting a booster jab gives us real hope. From our experience, this will help keep them protected. From what we're seeing, it seems to be working.
Spain is still considered low risk in many regions, but some areas such as Catalonia and the Basque Country have seen spikes in recent days. A stark reminder, if any, that there is no room for complacency in this ongoing battle against COVID. So Spain seemingly avoiding the worst effects of this latest wave of coronavirus infections that's sweeping across Europe. But as Emmanuel Macron, the French president, said, it's a matter of not letting your guard down. Back to you.
Don't let your guard down. Rahul Pathak in Madrid. Thank you.
The European Union has approved a low dose of the BioNTech vaccine for children aged between 5 and 11. The company says the jab will be available from late December. Europe is once again the centre of the pandemic, with infections soaring across the continent. Daily COVID cases and deaths are also rising again in the United States. Health officials are worried that the holiday season will bring even more infections. Nitza Soledad Perez reports.
It's like a never-ending nightmare. COVID-19 infections in the U.S. are rising once again, coming at a time when vaccines are readily available. In the U.S. state of Idaho, healthcare workers struggle to treat unvaccinated patients.
I believe we do need to have our freedom to choose, and so I respect that. But as a healthcare worker, it's really sad to see all these unvaccinated people, with sickness, and there's worse cases than others.
Dozens of states are seeing their numbers climb as outbreaks continue to worsen.
It's just really gone up, particularly in the Midwestern states like Nebraska, Colorado, New Mexico, but also up into the northern Wisconsin and Minnesota, across Maine. The cases have gone up quite exponentially.
What do you think are the main causes behind this new uptick or new surge?
Well, this is a tricky virus. It's hard to say, but certainly weather may have something to do with it. In the summer, we had more cases in the south when it was hot and they were inside. And now those folks are going outside because it's not so hot and muggy, but the people in the north and the Midwest are going inside. And so that certainly could contribute to it.
The majority of the new cases are unvaccinated people, and some remain unconvinced of its effectiveness.
Yeah, and even though that I have COVID, I just don't believe the vaccine has been proven yet. And that's my own belief.
Florida has been the U.S. epicenter of the pandemic. Here, health officials are worried about what the upcoming holidays will bring.
What we do see down here in South Florida is an increase due to international travel. So what we'll see is all the inbound passengers, we do see a number of cases that will follow them. So we are expecting a post-holiday surge. We've seen it for every major holiday at all of our sites across Florida.
Some health providers say they're ready for the next surge. Meanwhile, government officials across the country continue to push boosters for adults and encourage parents to get their children vaccinated. Nitza Soledad Perez, CGTN, Miami.
Australia is sending security personnel to the Solomon Islands after anti-government protests escalated into riots. Over 100 police and Defence Force staff will arrive during the next 24 hours after a request from the country's Prime Minister. Greg Navarro reports.
There are a host of issues, political issues, surrounding all of this, and it's really quite complicated. But essentially, to boil it down, these protesters are calling for the country's prime minister to resign. They are extremely unhappy over a number of political issues, including a lack of infrastructure, lack of development, not really receiving things that they believe they should receive. We're getting reports that there are some buildings, some shops in the city's Chinatown that have been looted as a result of that. And again, there are no signs that this unrest is letting up anytime soon at this point. Again, Australia is sending all those personnel not only immediately, but also within the next 24 hours to help out a little bit of stability and some peace to the area.
That was Greg Navarro reporting from Sydney.
Still ahead.
Not have ever become an Olympian, but at least for today, I got the privilege to experience the grooming services athletes can expect at Olympic villages.
Helping them to look their best, we meet the hairdressers making sure Olympians at the Winter Games don't have a hair out of place.
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. With the start of the Beijing Olympic Games just over 3 months away, athletes are busy in training mode for the big event.
It will be China's Paralympic ice hockey team's first appearance at an Olympic event, and they're training hard for their debut. CGTN's Sershi Juan went along to get a taste of the preparations.
It's early in the morning, and it's already heating up in the gym for the Chinese para ice hockey athletes. They are warming up before going on the ice. The sport demands upper body strength.
A regular player moves on skates. The para ice hockey player uses a sled. We have athletes who have lost one leg or both legs. They have to stay secure in the sled to participate in the game. It's very fast. I think it's harder than regular ice hockey.
Players use 2 sticks, which have a spike end for pushing and a blade end for shooting. The team earned a gold medal in the 2021 World Pair Ice Hockey Championship B pool in Sweden earlier this year. That earned players a ticket to participate at the upcoming Paralympic Games.
The team was established in 2016. The youngest player was 14 years old. The average age of the athletes is 25. We have a good combination of people on the team.
The team lacks experience competing in international games compared to Western countries, but the head coach says he's working on that.
We ran a lot of drills and regular training this year. We played many games based on how the real games would be carried out. The players wore different jerseys and formed different teams. We'll keep working and improving their physical strengths and strategies in games. We watch videos of the leading teams to understand their strengths.
The team members say they cherish every opportunity to grow.
We are a team that is emerging. We're fast and flexible. We know and work with each other well. We will use effective positioning and passing techniques to play good games.
This will be the team's first appearance at the Winter Paralympic Games. They want to use the opportunity to learn and compete. Chen Ziyuan, CGTN, Beijing.
Athletes taking part in the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing may well want to look their best under the international spotlight.
Services to help them do just that will be on offer at the Olympic Village. CGTN's Cao Shenfeng met the exclusive grooming service provider for the Games to get a flavour of what the athletes can expect.
Welcome.
Welcome. These aren't ordinary English class students. They are the hairdressers and nail artists who will work in the Olympic Villages next year. The 19-member team will work across 3 villages, serving more than 1,000 athletes and coaches from around the world. Since being assigned the job, they've been taking various classes and doing research, hoping to give their special customers a real Olympic experience.
We looked at past Winter Olympics to see what athletes like to do with their hair and nails. We are also prepared to do nail paintings that are inspired by 2022 Olympics emblem or elements from athletes' home countries.
And of course, they are busy trying to ensure their services match Winter Olympics requirements and standards. I doubt I will ever become an Olympian, but at least for today, I got the privilege to experience the grooming services athletes can expect at the Olympic Villages. The athletes and coaches will be greeted by a translator the moment they step into the salon. As for me, I was given a tour by a co-founder of the service provider.
Excellent means that you are ready.
Yeah.
Let me give you a tour. And we only use disposable towel, which means that after your wash, we will use this and we will throw it away.
Okay.
And this is made from sustainable material, pure cotton. You can try, it's very soft.
Yeah, it is. It is very soft.
And now we're going to take you for a haircut and we're going to do your nails.
Yay, wonderful. N95 face masks, face or eye covers, and disposable bibs and gloves for staff and customers are required at all times in the salons. They also make sure all tools and equipment are regularly disinfected. Now I'm feeling all fresh and pampered. The staff have been very impressive with their skills and professionalism. What's been more impressive is the level of hygiene during these services.
Because we were getting close contact with athletes and coaches, coronavirus control is a very important part of our job. Some of these hygiene measures were suggested by the Beijing Organizing Committee, and some were laid down by ourselves based on the experiences we've had during the pandemic.
The team said they can't wait to show the world the warm hospitality of the Chinese people and let the world's top athletes have a taste of China's world-class grooming industry. Cao Chufeng, CGTN, Beijing.
I know a lot of athletes are quite superstitious and they have a routine, don't they, before they take part in their event. And if I was them, I'd probably want to have that pampering afterwards, wouldn't you?
Can't put a price on looking good, though. Look good, perform well. Maybe, not that I'm an Olympic athlete, so... Yeah.
But you look good.
Now, nothing says British countryside like its hedgerows, lines of shrubs and trees giving the country its iconic patchwork appearance.
Now, hedgerows are being hailed as the unlikely heroes of climate change. Julia Carbonaro reports.
It sounds like a chainsaw massacre, but this is actually the beginning of a new life for the shrubs and trees. Hedgelaying is a centuries-old art that requires an expert understanding of how far boughs and branches can be cut and twisted while retaining their strength and vitality.
You cut part of the way through the tree, let's say about 3/4 of the way through, and that small amount of wood is enough to keep the tree alive. And where you cut it, it sprouts from the bottom again, so it's kind of rejuvenating the tree.
Hedgelaying has been practiced for hundreds of years, but it suffered a sharp decline after World War II, with the introduction of wire fences replacing the hedges and changes in agriculture. Since 1945, England's countryside has lost half of its hedgerows, but now the UN panel on climate change is calling for their numbers to be restored for the sake of local wildlife and the environment.
In Britain, we've got, I think it's over 1,000 species
that depend on hedgerows for their life. 130 of them particularly are very vulnerable and rely on hedgerows.
Besides offering refuge to vulnerable species, like the hazel dormouse, experts also believe hedgerows could be the key to fighting the climate crisis and helping the UK to reach zero net emissions by 2050.
Hedges can do an awful lot in our fight against climate change. They're storing lots of carbon in this woody stuff above ground. They're storing carbon in their roots above ground, but they're also constantly adding carbon into the soil as soil organic carbon, below the hedge itself.
The countryside charity CPRE is calling for the creation of 40% more hedges in the UK by 2050 to take their total length to around 900 kilometres. Their comeback could make a real difference for the future of the planet.
Giulia Carbonaro, CGTN, Hampshire.
And finally, Easter eggs at Christmas, it's no joke. Fans of the legendary Russian jeweller Peter Carl Fabergé are scrambling to see an exquisite display of his Easter eggs. The Victoria and Albert Museum here in London hatched the idea to show off some of his most decadent designs.
Visitors are particularly shell-shocked by the Moscow Kremlin egg, which is on display in the UK for the first time. Fabergé opened a jewellery branch in London in 1903, the only time he expanded outside of Russia. Curators say the history of Fabergé is an excellent example of an Anglo-Russian phenomenon.
Excellent puns, Julia.
Extraordinary.
Well, that is it for Global Business Europe. Thank you for watching.
More on all of our stories with puns at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team here in London, goodbye.
Goodbye.